The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local journalism today at chly.ca/donate. Local news doesn't survive without local support.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. As rains once again battered Vancouver Island over the weekend, multiple regions grappled with the risk of flooding. On Monday, an evacuation notice was temporarily issued for around 10 properties in Chemainus due to flooding risk, and an evacuation notice was also issued for a campground in Parksville. A UBC prof says that while governments and media outlets are often quick to point to climate change as a driver of more frequent atmospheric rivers and increased flood risks, he feels more attention needs to be given to the role of forest management practices, especially clear-cut logging, in creating conditions for dangerous floods. Interested in learning more about the ability of the island's road infrastructure to handle heavy rainfall, I reached out to Younes Alila.
My name is Younes Alila, and I am a professional engineer in training, but I'm also a professor at the Faculty of Forestry at the University of British Columbia on Vancouver campus. And I have been working as a hydrologist within the Faculty of Forestry since 1996.
And could you give me a sense of how much water the highways around Vancouver Island are designed to be able to accommodate?
First of all, Joe, all of our infrastructures, from highways to roads, to bridges, to culverts, to dikes, all of those engineering structures have been designed decades ago, and therefore they've been designed based on all the standards of flood risk management. And those all the standards of the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, based on which all of our engineering infrastructures has been designed and built, are certainly not fit for the intensified climate as a result of global warming. And the proof on the fact that even the BC government is aware that our engineering design standards are outdated, our flood risk management is actually outdated. The BC government have actually developed a new flood risk management strategy for British Columbia that'll guide us in the future. They have actually, over the last 3 years, solicited all kinds of inputs from all stakeholders, including professionals and scientists and lower-level governments and everybody involved, to develop this new strategy for flood risk management. They developed it, they put it out on the web, but it's actually shelved, like many other pieces of a new initiative. They go on and develop them, but they shelve them for whatever reasons, not the least of which perhaps is the cost associated with implementing these new strategies. And so, but the cost of society and infrastructure being subject to more severe, more frequent, and over longer duration extremes in the forms of floods is also humongous. And therefore, the BC government need to act on those pieces of new strategies, pull them out of the shelf, dust them off, and start seriously implementing them to safeguard society and the environment. So basically, as to the question, how much our highways can take with regard to pooling, they certainly, the way they have been designed, cannot take the pooling that current flood regime that has that we have been experiencing as a result, and the floods are becoming more severe, much more frequent, over longer duration, everywhere in British Columbia, particularly on the coast of BC, is certainly not fit for the new flood regime intensified by climate change, land use, and land cover changes that we've been aggressively doing. So these atmospheric rivers, Joe, the science literature, not from my own research lab, but international science literature, have shown that these atmospheric rivers are becoming more severe, way more frequent, covering much larger spatial extent as a result of an intensified climate by global warming. But we need to be careful not to start blaming every flood event and every atmospheric river strictly on global warming. The government in BC in particular, and others, including some of the media, are quick to blame and scapegoat climate change for every single atmospheric river. But I'm sorry, some of these atmospheric river events and the consequential flood events are meant to happen even under no disturbance of the climate. Even if the climate is not intensified as a result of global warming, there is certain frequency of these events that are meant to happen naturally. And they're called natural atmospheric river events and natural consequential flood events. But global warming and in the form of climate change and land use change and forest cover change comes in to make those flood events much more frequent. Therefore, in my opinion, we need to be very careful. I'm not a climate change denier, make no mistake about it. Global warming has intensified the climate, and that has a huge consequences of making those droughts and floods and landslides much, much more frequent. That's no doubt about that. But the fact remains, our actions on the land in the form of regulation and policies in the upland comes in to make those flood events much more severe and way much more frequent. And on top of this list of our actions on the land in the form of, say, urbanization, agricultural practices, right? And clear-cut logging, I would rank clear-cut logging in the backyards of urban areas and in the rural areas is the top factor that makes these flood events much more severe and, most importantly, much more frequent. And therefore, yes, we need to upgrade our flood risk management strategies and upgrade our engineering design to accommodate the new realities of a changing land use and land cover and changing climate. But on its own is not enough, because we need to make sure we consider adapting our regulation and policy with regard to land use, land cover, and forest management policies in ways that will actually help us reduce the risk of flooding as opposed to making it worse.
What are some of the ways that you suggest that the road network is kind of outdated or ill-equipped to handle heavy rainfall that comes with an atmospheric river? What are some of the specific deficiencies?
Yes. So first and foremost, I'm an engineer, right? The old design practice of drainage system associated with highways, bridges and culverts and the likes, and even dikes, are really focused on, are really, if you allow me to be a bit geeky, they are referred to as that design practice, the old design practice is referred to as magnitude centric. And magnitude centric design means based on making these bridges higher, the culverts larger, the dikes are higher. So building larger concrete structures like bridges and dikes and culverts is not going to save the day. It's certainly not going to save that. We may have been able to get away with it in the old standard design before the global warming and the land use change and the forest cover change. Not anymore. Why? Because if you ask the transportation, the Ministry of Transportation colleagues who are in charge of updating and upgrading the drainage structures and the highway system, they will tell you that our drainage structures have been failing, not as a result of a flood event coming in with a bigger discharge, bigger magnitude, more severe cubic meter per second discharge. They don't fail as a result of a single event coming in with a discharge greater than the design capacity. They fail because these larger events, including the design larger events of the design capacity of a culvert and a bridge, etc., are becoming way more frequent as a result of global warming and as a result of climate change and land use change. And therefore, these structures are not failing because a single event came in with a magnitude bigger than the design capacity. They fail because the extreme flood event of the past are becoming the norm today. Therefore, these extreme flood events are becoming much more frequent. Therefore, our design of these structures ought to be designed not just for size, like bigger. They need to be designed for strength because they are failing as a result of destabilization by these larger events becoming way more frequent as a result of disturbances of all kinds. The climate change, the land use change, the clear-cut logging, all of these are making all of the flood events of all sizes way more frequent. And the larger the flood event, the more frequent these floods are. Therefore, when the old design is based on making these culverts and bridges and structures bigger, that's not going to solve the day. It's a big waste of taxpayers' money, and it's not going to solve the problem. We need to start designing for both size and strength, making sure these infrastructure can take the battering with destabilizing it. They can take it, they're stronger. Therefore, they can take these flood events becoming more frequent. So that's number one that should be considered in the new design. Number two, we should not only be relying on engineering structure stronger and bigger in the lowland. That's not enough because the source of the flood risk is in the upland, in the headwaters, sometimes 10 kilometer, 100 kilometer, even 1,000 kilometer upstream of the urban areas where highways are, right, and populated area are. It is in the headwaters that are far away upstream that we continue to, for instance, clear-cut logging aggressively. And therefore, any flood risk management strategy ought to be based on a combination of better engineering design for both size and strength, but also better thought regulation and policies related to land use and land cover and forest management in the upland, in the headwaters. We should not be, I've been calling and repeatedly for abandoning clear-cut logging, because the clear-cut logging, which is shaving all the trees with these industrial machines, logging the small, the medium, the large, the very large trees, all of them, that's called the clear-cut logging. You don't leave anything. 30 years of research that I've been doing out of Faculty of Forestry at UBC have demonstrated that that sort of clear-cut logging, and we've been doing it excessively for the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years, have actually left all of the landscape across all of BC at a very heightened risk to both downstream communities, their livelihood, right, as well as to the environment, to fish in the channels, to the water quality in community watersheds, destabilizing the channels, destabilizing infrastructure. Therefore, the best strategy for the future is to rely on a combination of downstream infrastructure that are concrete and purely engineering, designed for strength and for size, but at the same time, our regulation and policy in the upland, particularly in the form of forestry and forest practice, must be in sync. Otherwise, we're going to continue wasting taxpayers' money on flood risk management in the lowland and urban area without meeting its objective, because we're this engineering structure, if we rely solely on them, they are treating the symptoms and not the root cause of the problem, because the root cause of the flood risk, the increase in runoff and sediments of the flood risk in the lowland and the urban area where the highways are, originate in the headwaters, 10 kilometers, 100 kilometers upstream, as a result of our excessive clear-cut logging in particular, right? And this has been recognized for over 30 years of peer-reviewed literature and top hydrology journals from my own research lab and from other research labs globally. And it's up to the government to actually start guiding forest management, water management, drought management, flood management by the proper science to protect the public and the environment in British Columbia.
Could you explain to me how clear-cut logging on Vancouver Island specifically, maybe southeastern Vancouver Island specifically, how that plays into atmospheric river events and what the consequences of it have been?
You see, the clear-cut logging intensifies the floods and via various mechanisms. When you clear-cut log the trees, you're going to have more snow, especially mid to high elevation. On the coast, you're going to have more snow on the cut block. That snow would not have been if the old forest was there. But when you take the trees off, you create a snowpack. The next atmospheric river comes in, it's going to wipe all that snow out to the ocean in no time. Let me repeat. Mid to high elevation, the precipitation on the coastal of BC fall in the form of solid precip, snow. That snow with the forest in mid to high elevation most of the time falls in the form of wet snow. And when the wet snow is intercepted by the old forest that was there before the clear cutting, that wet snow is ripe. It's like fruit, ripe. Ripe in hydrology means it's ready to melt because it's wet. And there is so much shortwave radiation under the canopy, that's heat, is actually melting that wet snow, and that wet snow drips under the old forest infiltrates into the soil to recharge the groundwater table, which then that recharge of the groundwater comes in handy to alleviate droughts during the driest periods of the year. But when you create the clear cut, the snow starts forming in the cut block, mid to high elevation, the next atmospheric river is going to wipe it. Let me give you an example. During the November 2021 flood event, the so-called 0-degree freezing level went all the way up to 2,000 meter above sea level elevation, which means all the snow, mid to high elevation, sitting in cut blocks, have melted as a result of the atmospheric river. If that does not make the flood event of the November 2021 event much more severe, I don't know what would make it more severe. Because had we had forest instead of cut block, the wet snow would have been intercepted by the old forest, slowly dripping as melted drip liquid under the canopy and infiltrates into the soil, and it takes months for it to travel to the channel below the ground. And that's what actually alleviates droughts for us during the driest periods of the year. Therefore, that's one mechanism, mon ami. That's one mechanism associated with logging. Our landscape have become draped with forest roads. These are the roads that are used to access the wood by the forest industry. These roads have cut banks. And these cut banks are now intercepting what used to be subsurface runoff, below ground runoff, into the side of the road, collected in a road ditch. The ditch is actually drained by a small culvert under the forest roads. That small culvert is usually linked to an existing gully or a small stream. And now suddenly, what used to be subsurface runoff, below ground runoff, before building the roads, that subsurface runoff, or at least a good portion of it, is now intercepted by the cut bank of the road. It becomes surface runoff. It runs into the ditch drained by the culvert discharges into an existing gully, out to the ocean in no time. And therefore, that actually exacerbates not only droughts in the driest period of the year, but also the flood risk. Because when you intercept what used to be subsurface runoff, below ground runoff, because the infiltrated rain or snow melt infiltrates into the soil, travel long distance to go to the channel. If you are intercepting it by very dense network of forest roads, that subsurface runoff is becoming surface runoff. It travels to the gullies and the channel system out to the ocean in no time. It exacerbates flood risk, but it also exacerbates the drought risk in the driest periods of the year. That's another mechanism. A third mechanism, when the trees that we used to have, the trees that we don't have anymore, and I'm talking about old growth and primary forest, because over the last 50 years, we have decimated all of our old growth in British Columbia, not just on the coast, everywhere, but particularly more severe in the coast, because the old growth are really old growth, big trees, and we have been logging them. Guess what? These older trees that we logged are sucking moisture from the soil for regrowth and for photosynthesis. When they suck moisture from the soil, they leave behind the soil moisture deficit. When the next storm comes in, when the next storm comes in, like an atmospheric river, for instance, it finds a drier soil, because the trees were actually pumping from the groundwater all the way up to the atmosphere. They release the soil from excess moisture when they actually evapotranspirate, when they suck moisture from the soil for regrowth. They release the soil from excess moisture. So the next atmospheric comes in, it's going to find drier soil. So therefore, we have less runoff and less severe floods. You take the trees, you eliminate the sucking of the soil moisture, or we call evapotranspiration. It's not there. the clear-cut logging will leave behind wetter soil. When the atmospheric river comes in and finds wetter soil, the floods are much more severe and more frequent. That's another mechanism associated with clear-cut logging.
Can you give me a solution to the issue you've identified that would be politically palatable?
Well, we have, you see, since the mid-60s, when we first introduced industrial logging machines to do clear cutting, and we do clear cutting because it's the cheapest way to get the wood, but it comes at a high expense to the public, a high expense to the environment, high expense to the fish, high expense to the water, the water quality in community watersheds. We have been calling for abandoning the practice of clear cutting and excessive clear cutting in favor of more eco-friendly logging practices, right? Particularly now that we are going to be managing and logging second growth, because we're done with the old growth. Most of it is gone. Now we're going to be basically getting ready in the near future to start managing the second growth. But if we're going to continue clear cutting the second growth in the same way we did the clear cutting the old growth for the last 50, 60 years, we haven't learned anything from our dramatic experience. And therefore, we need to be adapting logging practice other than clear-cut logging. And there are many ways that we teach undergraduate students, such as selective tree logging, small patch cutting, strip cutting. I'm not a registered professional forester to tell you more about, but I'm telling you in the Faculty of Forestry at UBC, we teach our undergraduate students a wide range of logging practices. Clear-cut logging is one of many. And while European countries are now managing their second growth forest via techniques other than clear-cutting, we continue and we insist on actually doing clear-cut logging, which comes at a big price to the environment and to downstream community. And this is why I have been extremely vocal against the practice of clear-cut logging. And I just want to remind your audience, mon ami Joe, I want to remind your audience, I am a professionally registered engineer in an association called Engineers and Geoscientists of BC. And we are all professionals registered in this association, mandated to protect the public and protect the environment. Not just from calamities caused by climate change, and I am not climate change denier, but also by protecting the public and the environment from an increase in flood risk and drought risk and landslide risk, also caused by our action on the land in the form of regulation and policy. And of course, professionals have a big role to play in affecting a change. Because who else would advise the policymaker and the bureaucrats and the clients who could be industry that there is a lot at stake? We are mandated to advise and tell it as it is to our clients and to the public and to the media. I've been speaking up and speaking out, and very loudly, and I'm going to continue to do that, and as long as I live, and as long as needed, and I'm hoping for a change before I'm done.
Now, I'm going to acknowledge that this will require a degree of perhaps guesstimation, of oversimplification, but if we're talking about the issue of flooding on Vancouver Island and coastal regions on roads, and you had to kind of handicap the amount of that, the reasons causing that, to what percentage they're sort of general climate change, increased precipitation, increased global temperatures, and you had to handicap to what amount changes might be caused directly by clear-cut logging in and around the coastal regions. What would you say, how much of this do you think it's reasonable for someone, a layperson, to put down and sort of lay the blame at clear-cut logging, and how much is down to, as well, the other factors?
You see, governments all over the world have paid taxpayers' money, have spent taxpayers' money to educate professionals, to produce professionals in the form of ecologists and biologists and engineers and geoscientists, professionals from all walks of life. We have been trained by taxpayers' money. And therefore, when the experts speak, you need to trust them. The public need to trust them. The public doesn't have to understand. We are here mandated by our own association to protect the public and the environment. Why? Because we've been trained and educated by taxpayers' money. Doesn't that make sense? The public doesn't have to understand, frankly, because the professional's role to actually advise and speak up and speak out inside meetings, closed-door meetings, as well as outside in the media, to address these issues and help guide politicians who are being misguided, right? So there is that part of it. The second part, I'm telling you, I know the literature of forest hydrology upside down. And forest hydrology as a science, the science community, so forest hydrology have a sad history of being embroiled in controversies that never seems to get resolved. Why? Because of attendance influences. Is it because the hydrologic response of the watershed is actually complex? Absolutely not. It's actually much simpler than many would have thought. Some of us makes it sound complex, but actually it's not complex. Invite me to present and I'll tell you how it's not complex. Right? As a matter of fact, you read the forest hydrology literature and it tells you very critically, it's not me who said this, other who among the who's who in forest hydrology have said it, that the public have always believed for centuries that the forest reduces the flood risk and dramatically. But then the scientists would come back and tell the public, sorry, but our science doesn't tell you that. Well, I'm sorry, if the science has been meddled with politics, then it's unfortunate. Because it's as simple as bonjour. When the snow, let's make it simple for the audience. When the snow accumulates from October all the way to end of March, they call it perennial snowpack for 6 months. It's all solid precip. And then suddenly melts in a couple of months in the spring because of the temperature going up. And suddenly you remove all the coniferous trees in watersheds of all sizes, small, medium, large watersheds. You remove all the trees through clear cutting. And that has been happening everywhere in British Columbia. Do you know that the coniferous trees intercept as much as 30% of the annual snowfall? Do you know that the 30% intercepted snowfall evaporates back into the atmosphere, is lost from the ground because it evaporates, because intercepted snow between two successive storms has a chance to sublimate, to evaporate. It's gone out of the watershed to the atmosphere in the form of vapor. You lose 30% of the snow back to the atmosphere as a result of the interception of the snow by the canopy. So imagine having an extra 30% of snowpack in the ground as a result of clear cutting. If that does not increase the flood risk, I don't know what it would. Now, If the snowpack is accumulated under the canopy, the snowpack is shaded. The snowpack is shaded. And if the snowpack is shaded, it melts slower. And when it melts slower, it has better chances of infiltrating into the soil. And when it infiltrates into the soil, it travels months to get to the channel system. But if you cut the trees in the form of cut blocks, and you do that all over the places, the energy available to melting the snow through solar radiation is huge. And the snow melts much faster. It goes to the channels and travels out to the ocean. The public knows all of these. The public knows that the trees are pumping like crazy groundwater, relieving the soil from excess moisture. The public is aware of this. You combine all of these factors, the shading of the snow, the interception of the snow, the pumping of the soil moisture from the ground, relieving the soil from you basically sum them up, and you got a recipe for a disaster. And this is why the public is not surprised, have always believed that the forest cover reduces the flood risk and dramatically. I have been publishing over the last 30 years, vindicating the public perception that the forest cover is extremely powerful. The most powerful natural agent for protecting us against the flood risk is the old forest cover that we have lost over the last 50, 60 years, and very aggressively. And it takes, in the interior alone, because the interior is a drier environment, in the interior alone, it takes 60, 80 years for the new forest, the newly growing forest and the cut block, because they replant the trees and trees grow back by natural succession. It takes 60 to 80 years for the forest to regain the hydrologic functionality that it was there before logging. So therefore, we don't need to educate the public. We don't, because the public have always believed the forest is extremely powerful in regulating and mitigating water in the channels, mitigating landslide, mitigating droughts, mitigating floods. Our most powerful protection against all of these calamities, including wildfire, is actually the old forest cover that we don't have anymore, unfortunately, all over British Columbia. Apart from a few parks here and they're actually getting their hands into the cookie jar, wanting to actually log the parks as well, in the name of wildfire mitigation.
If I were to sum up what I'm taking away from this conversation, it's that you're suggesting that increased frequency and increased severity of flooding events is in part really down to clear-cut logging practices over the course of decades, but the extent to which perhaps the media or the government is talking about that as a cause isn't proportionate to the amount it has caused the issue. And you're suggesting that like what could be done to mitigate this issue is to change forestry practices, to move away from clear-cut logging. And there seems to be a tone of passion in your voice, because I get the sense that you feel that this isn't being done or isn't being done fast enough. Do you think that's a fair summation? Is there anywhere else that we're kind of like left at? Where are we now? What needs to happen?
Our actions on the land do not portray an appreciation of how powerful the forest is in mitigating hydrologic extremes in the form of droughts, landslides, and flood risk. And now we need to ask ourselves the question, is that ignorance? Or do we know better, but we decided to, is that lack of knowledge? Is that lack of knowledge by those who are designing regulation and policy? Or Do they actually know better but decided to ignore? Either way, the consequences are dramatic on the environment and the public. And court cases, particularly in the form of class action lawsuits, are multiplying as we speak in British Columbia. I could name several examples. And therefore, the bottom line is this. May the peer-reviewed proper science, defensible science, be used to guide our regulation and policy related to drought management, flood risk management, water management, forest management, as opposed to the proper science being used by judges and lawyers fighting battles in the courtrooms, because that's exactly what is happening. The deafening silence of the BC government with regard to our policies related to drought management, flood management, forest management is just flabbergasting, frankly.
Is there anything else you think it's important to bring to the conversation today on this issue?
I would like these discussions to come out more to the public so that bureaucrats and politicians become more aware of it. And therefore, more of us, professionals and scientists, need to come out and speak to the issues, because we cannot afford, and we cannot afford silence in the background of an intensified climate. And how many more events, the likes of the November 2021 flood, do we need for the government of British Columbia to take proper actions? And I do understand that the government of BC have never been in debt the way they are right now. And mind you, in my opinion, as a result in big part of floods, droughts, wildfires, right? I understand that. But I think it is during tough economic conditions that governments around the world decide to invest in infrastructure and in proper flood management and drought management schemes. And if it takes rehauling, completely redesigning our policy with regard to forest management, then be it. Tough situation call for tough measures. And we need to bite the bullet and move forward on the right footage. And keeping quiet about it, ducking it under the carpet is not going to help anyone.
Professor Younes Alila, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you for having me, Joe.
Younes Alila is a professor in the Department of Forest Resources Management at UBC.
Midcoast Morning is part of our nonprofit newsroom project, supported by listeners like you. Keep this program on the air by funding it today with a monthly sustaining donation at chly.ca/donate. We've got tote bags and shirts if you need an incentive.
Road Safety at Work Director Trace Acers says drivers should approach hitting the road during periods of heavy rain with the same caution and attention they would bring in periods of heavy snow. He reminds drivers to check their tire pressure and tread, to steer clear of cruise control, and to slow down and leave space.
My name is Trace Acers. I am the program director for Road Safety at Work, which is a WorkSafe BC funded program aimed at reducing the deaths and injuries among people who drive for work. And I am the spokesperson for the annual Winter Driving Safety Program.
And what does all of the rain that comes for days and days with an atmospheric event, what does it mean for drivers?
Similar to when there is a heavy snowfall, there's a lot of things that come into play that when we're driving, we should be more aware of. And so there are a number of things that I would say are really important in both heavy rain conditions as well as snow conditions. And let's start by talking about visibility. That's probably one of the key things when you're dealing with heavy rain. Are your windshield wiper blades up to the task? When was the last time that you put new blade inserts in there? It's a good time in the fall, but any time during the winter to upgrade your blades to make sure that they are in good working condition. When you're driving in heavy rain, make sure your headlights and taillights are on. So many of our vehicles now, the headlights come on automatically, but the taillights don't. And it's just as important to be seen as it is to be able to see in heavy rain conditions. Also in heavy rain conditions, a lot of moisture, so that means that your defogger is going to have to work overtime to make sure that your windshields are clear. Let them do their job and make sure that you have a good full span of view on your windshield, because you don't want to be having to drive down the road looking through about 6 inches of clear windshield. And recognize as well that with heavy rains at this time of the year often come fewer daylight hours. So we're often commuting to or from work in the dark. So that adds to the issue, making all of the things that I've just talked about, wiper blades, headlights, taillights, defoggers, makes them even more important. So I'd say visibility is one of the key factors to think about when we're facing heavy rainfall.
How about driving on the highway between communities when drivers might not feel like it's as easier to sort of slow down and cruise along at 50 kilometers an hour or less or something like that?
Well, I think it's interesting that during the winter, speed limits are set as the maximum allowable speed under ideal driving conditions. And as we know, during winter, could it be rain, sleet, fog, snow, that the conditions are not ideal. So really the key is to not drive to the maximum, to drive to the speed limit, but drive for the conditions. So that means slowing down to a speed that you feel comfortable driving in, increasing your following distance between yourself and the vehicle in front of you, giving yourself more time to stop should you need to, and avoid using your cruise control, especially in heavy rain or snow conditions, because your vehicle's cruise control can't see the kind of conditions that you can. So you're much able to respond to them when you're in full control of the vehicle.
Now, how about if you're driving along the highway and you see maybe 2 seconds in front of you that there's a pool of water on the road? What should you do?
Well, pooling water is very, very hazardous because, for starters, you don't know how deep that puddle is, and you don't know what lurks below it. There might be broken pavement below it. There could be deep potholes below it. So you really do need to slow down and proceed cautiously anytime that you are coming upon pooling water. I can share one personal experience that I saw a few years ago in the Lower Mainland on Barnett Highway between Burnaby and Port Moody. And it had been one of those rare situations where there'd been a heavy snowfall in the Lower Mainland, and then the temperatures warmed up and everything melted and there was water everywhere. And I was following a vehicle, maybe the length of a football field behind this other vehicle. And I could see a great splash as it went into a pool of water. And the next thing I knew, their headlights were turned around and facing towards me. So that pool of water, they had gone in there, lost control of the vehicle, and it completely spun the vehicle around. Now, gladly, I was following far enough behind that I was able to slow down and just proceed past them, and they looked very shocked as I drove by them. But that can just show you that when you hit a deep pool of water at highway speed, so that would have been probably 80 kilometers an hour, bad things can happen. You can lose control of the vehicle, you can lose control of it completely or even momentarily, which can really throw you off. So drive for the conditions, and if you are coming upon pooling water, slow down and proceed very cautiously.
Are there any roads on Vancouver Island that are perhaps especially ill-suited to handling large volumes of rainfall and water?
Well, I think Vancouver Island and the Lower Mainland are in pretty good shape for dispersing heavy water because there is so much rainfall in those areas. But certainly storm drains can get overwhelmed anywhere in the city or in highway conditions. So it's not uncommon to see lots of pooling water when rain, as we've seen in some of these atmospheric rivers, when we get heavy rains, it can certainly overwhelm the systems. Also, be aware that on Vancouver Island, there are a number of routes that are designated winter tire routes, and that means that from the 1st of October through until the end of March, that you need to be using winter tires. And by that, we mean at a minimum, all seasons with the M+S rating, or full winter tires. Those are the ones with the three-peak mountain and snowflake symbol on the side. And make sure they are in good condition, because any type of tire, if it's in poor condition, is not going to give you the kind of performance that you need. And what police will be looking for if they're ever doing a tire check is, first of all, making sure you've got the right kind of tires, and secondly, that they are in good condition, and they're looking for a minimum tread depth of 3.5 millimeters. That's the minimum. Anything below that, and those tires are not legal on those routes. And the routes that I'm talking about really are over the Malahat, as an example. That is a designated winter tire route, just that portion of Highway 1 over the Malahat. And Highway 4 between Parksville and Ucluelet is another designated winter tire route. And then anything north or west of Campbell River. So the highway over to Gold River or up north to Port Hardy, both of those highways are designated winter tire routes. So be aware of those. The other thing that I think is really important at this time of the year is to check road conditions. Drive BC is a really good service that will provide up to the minute road conditions. Many highways have webcams that you can check out to see what's happening on those routes. So planning ahead, knowing what you're getting yourself into. If there's a route that you don't like the looks of it, choose a different route if you can. So planning ahead and making sure that your vehicle is equipped, that you're ready for the kind of conditions that you're going to be facing.
What kind of a difference is there between the three types of tires, if you will, or of summer tires, those M&S all seasons, and winter tires when it comes to driving through rain? Yeah,
so the biggest difference between, let's talk about all seasons with the M+S rating, because that's probably what most people are going to be running on their vehicles, and then full winter tires. The difference is a couple of things. One, the winter tires are going to have a more aggressive tread pattern that are going to be better at dispersing water and snow and slush. And they function better at lower temperatures. And that's really a key thing, I think, that the difference between the types of tires. The cutoff point is 7 degrees Celsius. Anything above 7 degrees Celsius, your all seasons are going to function just fine. But in temperatures that are consistently below 7 degrees Celsius, the all-season tires will stiffen up, and you won't get as good a traction as you will from winter tires, which are made of a softer rubber compound, which will give you better traction during cold temperatures. So that's really the main difference, is the tread pattern and the type of rubber compound that they're made of, and what works better at lower or higher temperatures.
Now, people are going to drive during the rain. It's a thing that happens. But is there a point where, beyond the obvious, perhaps biblical levels of flooding, is there a point that someone can say, well, it's rained this much in this many days, I know this is going to change from just driving in the rain to something that could be more seriously problematic?
Well, I think that you should treat heavy rain just as you would treat heavy snowfall. A lot of people, when it starts to snow, they will definitely start to make different plans, other plans, alternative plans to either driving themselves, driving a different route, those sorts of things. And I think you should really apply the same discipline to heavy rains, because you may not know what you're getting into on a particular route. I would say especially on maybe rural back roads where there's not good lighting and visibility is going to be a real issue on those routes. Think about the kinds of things that you could be facing on the routes that you're going to be traveling, and treat heavy rainfall just as you would winter snowfall, and make your decisions accordingly.
Is there anything else you think it's important to highlight to folks about driving in the rain?
Well, one of the key things, of course, is avoiding distractions. That's probably one of the main factors in crashes today is distractions. And those can be things inside the vehicle or outside the vehicle. So important to stay focused on the road, keep your hands on the wheel and your eyes on the road in front of you. In low light conditions like we've got right now, and especially in heavy rainfalls, you need to be watching out for pedestrians. A lot of times pedestrians will have their hoods up, or they'll be walking under an umbrella, and they won't necessarily be paying attention to what's going on around them. Also be on the lookout for wildlife. Wildlife, of course, can be on the road at any time of the year, but in low light conditions and heavy rain, it's just that much harder to see them. So avoid distractions within the vehicle. Leave your phone alone. Put the phone in the glove box where it's out of reach and out of sight. Make sure that you don't have a lot of things in the vehicle that might be distracting to you. Keep your conversations with passengers to a minimum, and then really be focused on what's going on around you, because a momentary distraction could take your eye off the road, and that could end up being a real problem. So avoiding distractions is an important message at any time, but I think especially in low light conditions, in conditions where you might risk losing control of the vehicle, it's just that much more important.
Trace Acers is the program director for the WorkSafe BC program, Road Safety at Work. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and RB Frew is our technical advisor. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. You can get in touch with us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
This program gives thanks to the Snuneymuxw First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.